We have some promising news for those of us who favor democracy and majority rule in this country. Recent polling indicates that the majority of Americans, by about a 2-to-1 margin, want to abolish the Electoral College and let the president be elected by direct popular vote. But before we unpack all that, if you haven't yet, please hit that like, subscribe, and the alert bell. Maybe check out my Patreon. I'd appreciate the support. All right, folks, so this story actually came out a couple of weeks ago, but we've been distracted with Donald Trump's legal and political woes, the formal impeachment inquiry into President Biden, the government shutdown, and then the shenanigans going on in the House of Representatives now that Kevin McCarthy has been ejected from power. But this is really, really important. We should talk about it. So this data comes from a recent Pew poll, and by about a 2-to-1 margin, I'm going to throw my glasses on so I can read it well, the majority of Americans want to get rid of the, regressive, unnecessary, outdated electoral college, which effectively enshrines minority rule in this country, at least in its current application. And this is huge. So 65% of U.S. adults want to get rid of it, compared to 33%. 65% say the way the president is elected should be changed so that the winner of the popular vote nationwide wins the presidency. A third favor keeping the current system. Now, Pew breaks it down a bit more. The one we're really going to focus on is the partisan views about the Electoral College. So as you can see, generally speaking, for the past 25 years, that more Democrats than Republicans favor abolishing the Electoral College for two reasons. Number one, Republicans tend to be, constitutionally conservative in the sense that if it's in the Constitution, let's keep it the way it is. They don't want to change things. But more obviously, Republicans know that without the Electoral College, their chances of winning the presidency are no longer quite so certain because, of course, the Electoral College has an increasing red rural state conservative bias. 82% of Democrats want to get rid of the Electoral College, whereas about 47% of Republicans want to do it. Okay. Now, listen, this isn't going to happen anytime soon. To get rid of the Electoral College, at least to abolish it the way that it should be done, would require a constitutional amendment because it's a constitutional mechanism. So you would have to, it's 2/3 of both chambers of Congress would have to adopt and ratify an amendment, and then to get it to pass, you would need 3/4, 3/4 of American states, which is like 38 states, right? That is virtually impossible. That's one of the reasons why we haven't had a constitutional amendment in nearly 35 years, okay? That the rate, the politicization and polarization of this country is going, it's not going to happen anytime soon. Now, there is another option. It's not talked about all that much, but it's the National Popular Voter Interstate Compact, right, which 16 states and Washington, D.C. have already agreed to it as of earlier this year. And basically, it's a compact. It's a decision among all the participants. They're like, listen, whoever wins the nationwide popular vote, that's who we assign our electors. So if it's a Republican who wins the national popular vote, all of us have to give the Electoral College votes to the Republican. If it's a Democrat who wins the national popular vote, all of us have to give all of our votes to the Democrat, okay? And it says these jurisdictions have 205 electoral votes, which is 38% of the Electoral College total, and 76% of the 270 needed to give the compact legal force. So you have to win a 270 majority in the Electoral College to become president. So that's probably the easier option, is somehow getting all states or enough states to, buy on board to this National Popular Vote Compact. And of course, there's questions about its legality and whatnot, but it's probably the easiest way to do it. But the ultimate, absolute best way is by constitutional amendment. That's not going to happen anytime soon. Now, the reason this is promising news is it indicates that we are becoming more open, like to an increasing degree, we want majority rule in this country. And I discussed in a video a couple of weeks ago, I was reading a book called The Tyranny of the Minority by two Harvard political scientists and experts in global democracy. And the fact of the matter is that the United States does enshrine minoritarian rule with a number of means. And people talk about how terrible the tyranny of the majority would be. And to be sure, a majority can be terrible. A majority can have bad ideas. They can have tyrannical ideas. They can, run roughshod over the civil rights and liberties and protections of a minority. But like the book Tyranny of the Minority makes the case, In the United States, it's really not possible because most of the bedrock civil liberties and, like the Bill of Rights or whatever, are beyond the reach of a simple majority, right? We really don't have to worry about a tyranny of the majority for the most part because most of the crucial things require like supermajorities or constitutional amendments to get rid of. And of course, there's all sorts of checks and balances and shared powers and all the things that would make, again, a simple majority. It would be pretty damn difficult for a simple majority to exercise any sort of tyranny. But then the question becomes, okay, what about a tyranny of the minority, right? We talk about a tyranny of the majority all the time, but the minority of constituents, they can be tyrannical too if they have power, right? Tyranny isn't something exclusive to greater numbers, right? A small group of people can have tyrannical impulses. And if you have a government system which allows them to exert undue influence over the government, it's kind of the same thing, right? So whenever somebody talks about tyranny of the majority, I think you should just reject the premise out of hand. I think, yeah, okay, majorities can be tyrannical, but so can a minority can be tyrannical as well. And you put the burden back on them. What's to prevent the minority from being tyrannical? And that's really what we have right now with the Republican Party, who constantly exploits, exacerbates, and seeks to expand minority rule in this country because they don't want to try to fight a fair political and electoral fight, even though, and this is something I pointed out before, in 2022, even though there was no red wave, more people vote with of the people who voted in the United States in 2022. More of them voted Republican than Democrat. Republicans won the popular vote in 2022. So this idea that the Republican Party simply can't be competitive if it just comes down to popular vote, that's something that they've imposed on themselves. Now, certainly their chances are reduced, right? They would actually have to compete with appealing candidates. They would have to campaign on a robust and persuasive policy agenda. They would have to work harder, to be sure. But they can absolutely remain competitive. They just don't want to try because the current system really doesn't incentivize them to do so. Donald Trump right now can be neck and neck with President Biden because of the institutions of minority rule and the ability to appeal to his base. He doesn't really. That's why you very rarely hear the question posed to Republican politicians, hey, what are you going to do to reach across the aisle and work with Democrats or blue states? What are you going to do? You can't just be the president or the governor of just conservatives. What are you going to do to benefit, to help out, to appease liberals, progressives, minorities, marginalized groups, things like that, people typically associated with the Democratic Party? The reason that nobody asks that question is because they don't have to consider it, right? Or it's less of a consideration. But this is huge. We do need to get rid of the Electoral College. By the way, as far as every democratic republic on earth, they don't have anything like the Electoral College. Democratic republics and democracies, they elect their leaders by direct popular suffrage. This is just a completely... And by the way, the purpose of the Electoral College, there were two purposes. Number one, it was to throw a bone during the Constitutional Convention to Southern slave-owning states who wanted basically to have their cake and eat it too. They wanted to be able to own people, other human beings, and did not deprive them of their rights and their dignity, but they also wanted those slaves to count towards the population of their own state so as to get more power, to disproportionate power in the legislature. So that was a huge reason why we had the Electoral College as well, and notions like the Three-Fifths Compromise. And the Electoral College has never served its purpose because the idea was also, well, listen, we don't want to leave it down to just popular vote. We want enlightened people, educated people to make enlightened decisions, because many of the founders did fear majority rule because they thought that a majority could, expand their own rights or take away certain privileges afforded by the ruling class. So the idea was, well, we would just appoint people to elect the most popular or the most important political position in the country, the president. But the vast majority of states assign their electors based on who wins that state's popular vote. So even its intended stated purpose isn't something that's really ever manifested. No matter how you slice it, the Electoral College is an abject failure. The only reason that you would defend it, of course, is because you're a Republican and you don't want to try to compete for the presidency on an even political or electoral playing field where you again, try to appoint an attractive candidate with an attractive policy platform or anything like that. But hopefully, at the rate this is going, we will see the end of the Electoral College, at least in one future generation.